Hello,
Okay,
and
I think it's done. Yeah.
yep, we're good. Welcome to this exciting session where we're going to be sharing some of the tactics and tools of artivism and how creativity can play a role in if anybody wanted to occupy their campus. I'm not saying anyone will, but in case anyone did, these are some things that they could do and some ways to think about both how we communicate um, out to the public about what's happening in the occupations themselves, and also things that can be done at the occupation to build a sense of community and build engagement and give people something to do while they're there. And just to say personally, I remember the beautiful imagery of walking into one of the main universities in Barcelona here, occupied about 10 years ago. And the whole thing was covered in banners. All of the statues of these old men all had like rebellious slogans hung on them. And you could just really see that physically the space had been taken over. And you could see that because of the art. So really good to think about ways in which art can help you take up more space, even if you're actually 7 people. If you have lots of banners and stuff, you can see like more. So I guess we'll get started with the presentation. I'm going to start sharing my screen. And if questions come up, feel free to put them in the chat or save them for the end. Here we go. Let's see. I'm going to play. Cool. So just as context, I'm part of a collective called the Artivist Network. You can check out our website, artivistnetwork.org. We dedicate ourselves to trying to support movements, particularly climate movement, in better using creativity and supporting artists and being more strategic with their creativity. So let's jump right in. And it's just before we jump into the direct tactics, just want to talk a little bit about like the way in which we approach artivism, which is really about narrative intervention. It's about thinking about how we can use stories to change the world. Because often if you change the story, you change the world. And I love to start with this photo. This is from an action, I think from the early 90s in the UK. It was a group that were protesting a highway occupation, and they had like met at a secret spot, marched onto the on-ramp of this highway that was in construction, and were walking, and they had this wonderful woman with bagpipes and this giant hoop skirt puppet thing walking along, and there's all this techno music playing, and she was playing bagpipes, and it's very visual. But as this woman walked along, underneath her skirt were people with jackhammers, those like machines, and that were digging holes in the highway and planting trees. So as this march went on, it replaced this highway with trees. And I like to start with this story because this story I had heard many times before I ever found a photograph of the action or talked to people that organized it. And the organizer said, look, it was kind of a shit action, like the trees got ripped up right away. Then, like obviously they didn't stop the highway. But the story of the action is so good that I think this is a good filter by which we can judge our actions, is that if it makes a good story, it's probably a good action. If it's a simple story that you can tell, then it's probably a simple thing you're trying to communicate. If it's like, there's all these penguins wearing hula skirts, and then like the penguins were like dancing, and then they got hot, so they fell over, and then like a big sign appeared saying no gas. Like it's very creative, but maybe it's like too creative. So you always want to make sure you're balancing art and message as you go. And so to change the world, we must first change its stories. We can create actions that disrupt both the physical world and the story world. So let's look at both how we can create actions that are coherent in their tactic and their message. And a little frame is, when people talk about activism, activism, the visual vocabulary of activism works really well if you're talking to activists. But to other people, it might just look like activism, and they don't actually know if you're a climate activist or a gender activist or protesting this or that. They just see you as activist. So we try to break some of these traditional codes of activism and reinvent activism and try to use culture. Because if with activism you talk to activists, with culture you talk to the general public. So really thinking about how do we move out of our activist ghetto and start really trying to think about our public as people that outside of our movements themselves. And so the typical like good activism, in terms of the world, reinforces the dominant story of who has power. And here's a photograph of some guy from a vase presenting a petition with 2 million signatures to Ban Ki-moon, who is head of the UN there. Al Gore is very happy about this. The mayor of New York at the time was there, and this is quite typical. It's we are asking you to change, please, if you want to. But there's no threat. And it's all men. And it's reinforcing the idea of who has power. Here it's saying you have the power, please. And it's true. Institutions do have lots of power, but they know that. So maybe we want to be showing that we too have power and using that in different ways. So if that's good activism, and maybe this is like bad activism, and bad because, in my opinion, just because the tactic isn't always coherent with the message. Here, you don't really know what they're angry about. They're smashing a jewelry store, but you don't know, is this in solidarity with the Congolese diamond mines that are trying to organize, or is this just angry people? And in terms of messaging communication, it's hard to understand why these people are here. So it's good to think about how creativity can make it so that any newspaper takes a photo of your action and cannot misinterpret it. It's like your message is so clear that any photograph conveys the story you're trying to tell. Whereas this photograph could be used like in any way to talk about anything. These could be far right, these could be far left. We don't know. So bad activism fights who has power. But artivism challenges the idea of who has power. We try to break the rules of the game, try to make illegal actions, not illegal or legal, but illegal. So this is an action we did in Barcelona, where there was a protest, and at the end, the riot cops were like, okay, everybody, time to go home. And families were in a plaza. It was a very calm environment. These guys were totally overdressed. So we had this giant inflatable cube, and we threw it at the police. And then the police did what they do, is they hit it, because that's what they like to do. They hit things. So they hit it, but then it bounced back. And then the crowd hit it back at the police, and then the police hit it back at the crowd, and then the crowd back at the police. And then suddenly both sides realized they were playing a game, and neither knew what to do because they'd broken the rules of activism. You're supposed to be fighting, not playing. So it challenges the idea of who has power by deconstructing power in ways where it exists and empowering people who traditionally don't have power. So let's always remember, artivism is a tool. Art is not a mirror held up to the world, but a hammer with which to shape it. Art is not a way in which we comment on the world. It's a tool to change the world itself. So artivism disrupts the official account of the world. Culture proposes new stories of how the world could be, and culture opens up space that politics can move into. Often this is about how do we show an idea and name an idea so that other people can have a vocabulary, have an understanding to talk about it. So just that last bit of this kind of artivism intro is framing. There's a basic truth about framing. If you allow, I can't read this because I'm like, I don't know. Anyway, if you accept the other guy's frame, you lose. And it's this, it's like the narrative frame is how the vocabulary we use to talk about something. And even calling ourselves activists is very different than calling ourselves defenders or protectors. All of these words matter. All of these words have associated terms with them. So we really need to think of, how we are reframing the debate so that the debate happens on our own terms. And I think with youth fighting around climate, especially, you have every justification in the world to do, honestly, this, how things are, it's something needs to be done. So I think there's a really good moment now to actually be pushing the limits of what is acceptably possible and challenging the idea that things such as, financing fossil fuels is acceptable. So let's move on. Reframe, you're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic. Little twist that can change your role in the story, change how we see it. So one of my favorite examples of this are the Pacific Climate Warriors. They are activists, climate activists from around the Pacific nations, some of the most vulnerable to sea level rise in the world. And they realized they were being used as the victim in this story. And I think this is often very common in activism, that we we fall into this trap of talking about ourselves as victims. Because we are often we're the ones suffering stuff. There's multiple systematic structural oppressions, and people are living the negative impacts of this. But we also need to remember that we are powerful in that, and the fact that any structural oppression that's facing you is also affecting the majority of other people in the world too, and that's where power lies. So they stopped wanting to be accepted as victims and started saying, we are not drowning, we are fighting. So they built all these traditional boats. They asked the trees which trees wanted to join in their action, and they brought these boats all the way to Australia to blockade a coal mine. And for a whole day, they blockaded a coal mine with a lot of other allies, with the entrance to a coal harbor, and they really came out of that as heroes, as leaders. So they led with a story of we are not drowning, we're fighting, and then they created an action that showed that story. And then this is a story many people still tell, and they are still heroes in many ways in the climate movement. Here, some of them are. And then just now, as we transition to talking about school occupations, the next project they did, they went back home and they realized, we blockaded this coal harbor, but I went back and told my grandma, and she was like, why'd you go all the way over there and do this dangerous thing like that when you could have just stayed here? That they realized the action didn't actually resonate with all of their own community. So they did another action facing their own community. And that was they wove traditional mats using a reed, like a grass that grows all over the Pacific Islands. And that grows on the edge of the shore. So with sea level rise, this will be affected. And as they wove these mats, these traditional rugs, they shared stories of climate impacts, which are very real in their communities. And I wanted to lead with this as an example of how we can think about creating things together with our hands is a tool that we can use during occupations, both to create something beautiful that tells a story, but also to share stories while we're doing it, and to build community together. And that can be painting a banner or any other things. It doesn't have to be as complicated as this. Also, just talking about objects that can tell stories. Here's an action from a French group, and banks had been bailed out by public money. So they said, well, if part of this bank is public, we're going to go in and take the chairs. So they would go into each bank, they would rob the bank of one chair. And then they gathered all these chairs together and had people's climate assemblies on these stolen chairs. But this idea of reiterating the public nature of something by taking back something symbolic and then using it as a space, to create a democratic space. Maybe that's an interesting tactic in your university too. I also wanted to share this example on the left here. There's this big banner. This is during an occupation in the Netherlands, organized by Groot Rood. And here you can see people actually making this giant banner inside the occupation itself. And it was, look, we're going to go there. We're going to try to stay there for a few days. So we need stuff to do. So what they did is actually they cut out all of the letters out of fabric and then had people sewing them on by hand. And that took hours, but while you're sewing it on, you start chatting, you start flirting, you start making new friends. And at the same time, you're making a banner. So we really encourage you to think about sewing as a tactic that could be used inside occupations. I wore this t-shirt, especially, even kind of ugly, but this shirt we made at an action. We were occupying in front of the European Central Bank or something, I think. And, a good way to, we went there, we were blocking the doors, and we're like, we want to hold the space, not be too nervous. So we started sewing and also singing. I think singing, teaching songs, making songs, practicing songs, write them up big on pieces of card, put them around. That's a great way to help people feel grounded and to kind of stay in the present of the action. Another way you can use objects is symbolically. Here's two different actions from the COP21 summit in Paris, where people were drawing the red line with their own bodies. So this limit of red line, where do we set limits? Like the planet's got limits, we're here to defend those limits. So thinking of those kind of like big visual symbols that help you tell a story, like maybe there's a big red line that goes across the campus around the director's office. You bring the red line into their office to say the red line is here, like you cannot fund coal right now, something like that. And then here's a group based in Portugal called Linha Vermelha, and they knit red lines. They get groups of people together to knit the red lines. Similar way, talking about how we can be talking about limits and showing scale of impact. So also that, like, that takes a while, and it's a great tactic, and you can like knit yourself warm socks for, the autumn occupation so that you're all ready for the next one. Ceremony. Ceremony, I think, is one of the projects of this generation, is to figure out what ceremony means for this generation, what it can be like. Here's an indigenous ceremony that I was helped organize at the COP21 summit in Paris. And I think often we think about like indigenous folks with ceremony, but there's many other ways to create ceremonial spaces. This was a ceremony of mourning in front of the Bataclan Theater, where an attack had happened in Paris. But here's another kind of ceremony, a project that's maybe interesting also for like decorating the campus, called the Climate Ribbon. And it's an arts ritual to grieve what each of us stand to lose to climate chaos and affirm our solidarity as we unite to fight against it. So basically what they do is they create these tree structures and have ribbons. And everyone can write on the ribbon something they hope not to lose to climate change. And they hang a ribbon on the tree, and you can have kind of these homemade trees, or you can like have a real tree. If there's a tree on your campus, you're all ready to go. You can just pass out these ribbons. But what they also do is, people are invited to leave a ribbon, and you could take one too as a bracelet, kind of as a reminder if you're taking someone else's commitment with you, and as a way to kind of visibilize. And also maybe this is interesting too, like during the student protests in Quebec and Montreal, I don't know, a while ago, they had the red square for Carmont dans la Rouge, like to be in debt, kind of. They had these red squares that came to symbolize the movement, and everyone sympathetic with the movement just pinned a little red felt square to their jacket. And it's a great visible way to show who's involved or who's not. So maybe with these ribbons or some other way, you can be trying to create, or buttons, stickers, you can be trying to create a visible way in which people can be showing their solidarity and support, because it provokes conversation. It's like, hey, what's that? Why are you wearing that? Or you see someone else wearing it on the bus, and you can talk to them because they're cool. So think of that, how to visibilize solidarity of the occupation, even if people aren't necessarily in it. You can print t-shirts, they don't have to be expensive. You can just print make a stencil and use like these sponge rollers and roll house paint on them. It can be pretty easy. Here's another kind of sort of memorial ceremony, the National COVID Memorial in the UK. People just start drawing hearts, but maybe this thing where it accumulates. Everyone comes and does one thing. These were hearts to people that had died because of COVID. But yeah, maybe something like that. Maybe there's a wall somewhere, chalk even, chalk's good because it's like not really illegal. You can always wash it off, but it leaves a mark. People can write a message to the future or something. But trying to like think about how you occupy space, like, and especially like these old stone buildings look great with like chalk written all over them, or like, you can also use temper paint. You might get more in trouble with that. But another thing, actually, I forgot to put in pictures of, is you could paint ground murals on the street using temper paint on the ground, and that's pretty easy to wash away. So like thinking about, that's kind of a higher level of risk, but it, if it washes away, it's hard for them to find you or something. Mass actions. And yeah, I wanted to include this as well and forgot again, but really think about your occupation. Like if you know how long you're going to be there, more or less, don't think of it as like you have to sustain this high level of occupation all the time, but really think of like the flow of it. It's like, okay, you start with like a cool thing, but you don't want to peak. You don't want to peak the first day, right? So you start with something cool, you kind of sustain it, you accept there's going to be a little bit of a lull, and then you build up to this big thing, and then like, there's another day of like whatever. But really think of like that arc of the energy, how like, if this was a movie plot, like in the beginning it's kind of slow, then something happens, then like it builds. There's this crazy moment where everyone like everything's revealed, and then it ends. So think about that, and so think about, where do you want the mass action to be? In if there's the moment when you have most people, when is that? What do you want, and what do you want that to look like? What are the messages you're holding up there? And certainly like that's the moment when your good photographer friend comes and takes lots of pictures. And really it's worth thinking in pictures of like, what's the iconic statue in your university? That's where the photo should be taken. What's like the gate? Where are people like linking arms in front of the door to the rector's office, even if it's just for the photo? Like what photos can tell your story? And how can you do this creatively? Here's a group from southern Spain, from Sevilla, called Flow 6x8. They have great videos on the internet. Flow, FLO 6x8. And they do flamenco interventions, mostly in banks, but also in like parliament offices. But kind of like a flash mob, but like invisible theater flash mob. Just someone starts singing like, "Oh, the banks robbed me," and then someone else joins in, and then 4 people start dancing, and then it builds. And also think like, are there parts of your action that the audience is not the people that happen to walk by, because that's kind of a random audience? But are there parts of your occupation that the audience is people who watch a video? Like sometimes you do an action and the audience is the people back home. Or is it we do an action and everyone tags this one decision maker, so they get flooded with all this. So really think about, who is your audience with, like who are you trying to communicate to, and what's the right medium or tool to communicate to them. Another tactic you can use when you're occupying space for a longer time are installations. These are 3 different installations made out of burnt wood. So these are people that, like the bottom left is a woman, a grandmother who had lost her house to a fire in Australia. So actually think about like, have there been fires near you? Can you bring some of that wood into the occupation? Have there been floods near you? Can you bring some of that mud? And if not, can you bring photographs of these? But like, this wood tells a story. It tells a story of climate impacts, and even better if there's people that are from this region that can talk about it. And a friend has been evicted last week. My stepmother was evicted 2 weeks ago. Here in Spain, these fires are everywhere right now. So I think it's on the tip of people's mind. Also, like here at least the drought is really severe. So maybe something about fountains, engaging with that, stopping the fountain, something. Also another way to kind of make like memorial, ceremonial spaces, use objects. Here is an action also from a COP21 in Paris of all the shoes of the people who couldn't come to Paris but wanted to show support. So thinking about this, of like the repetition of, actually we've got 200 students signed up that have signed this statement. So what are 200 notebooks hanging from trees look like? What do 200 backpacks like filled with balloons like in a row? What do 200 backpacks full of coal look like? Something like that, like something that can show kind of the numbers behind this in some ways. And especially if you're occupying universities, these kind of more artistic stuff can kind of like, it's hard to like look like you're like, it's hard to be like bad when you're like, oh, we're just art students, anyway. Yeah, you can always call something art if people are wondering what you're doing. Here's an action some of us did or supported here in Barcelona, where actually people were wheat pasting climate impacts onto banks. And these come out really nice. Photographs look really nice. And you can print these out. There's a few free programs to use, like Rasterbator, Rasterbator, or Posterazor, Posterrazor, that allow you to actually print any size you want, but like on A4 or A3 paper. So you can actually print that big and then cut off. You have to cut off some of the ends and then put them together. And if you're interested in this action, there's a whole how-to manual and video, I think, on the Artivist Network website, Artivist Network/resources. And it can show you, you can download the photos of climate impacts. It'll like, you can download them on A3 or A4 already. But maybe these, and wheat paste is a good tactic because you can buy this wallpaper glue in any store, in any like paint store, and you stick it up and it doesn't do permanent damage. It's not like spray painting. It's like you're gluing something, it can be taken off. So
can you repeat the name of the?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Rasterbator.
Yeah.
RAS.
Wait. Okay, say it again.
Rasterbator. RASTERBATOR.
Wait. RASTER.
BATOR.
Okay. And this is the place to, didn't get that part, to what?
It's like a free program that can make pictures big. But on the Artivist Network website, artivistnetwork.org/resources, there's a how-to manual for how to do this, which will tell you everything you need to know, including these links. But these can look really nice. Here's some fires and floods on the same bank. And here's another window, talking about heat waves. Okay, another tactic is to change the logic of a space. This is an action that was done by, I think the first action by Liberate Tate, a wonderful arts activism collective in the UK. And they challenged the logic of a space. This is in a museum. So actually there were all these sculptures of naked people around. So they said, we're going to go with a naked person as well, but we're going to cover them with oil. So this is kind of like more of a performance, but it makes a really powerful picture. And you see they put the BP logo, who was the sponsor of the museum they were protesting, on these oil drums. But this is like, 3 people, high, like great impact, not such a crazy cleanup, gets the point across. So these kind of stunts, but especially if you're in these old universities that have all these columns and look kind of like a museum anyway, you can really play with the logic of the space and changing it. Here's an action that was done by Fossil Free Culture, a great artivist group from the Netherlands, at the Van Gogh Museum, protesting the sponsorship of Shell in the Van Gogh Museum. And I wanted to put this in because it shows how you can play with space, like maybe one of the university buildings has one of these high stairs, like high stairwells, and you can actually do this multiple section banner kind of thing and really have like an powerful, big visual impact kind of thing. And I also wanted to just have like a little moment to talk about branding, because it's important. It goes a long way to making it look like you're like clean, organized, well thought out group. And that can be as simple as like using the same font and same colors. So here's an action at the COP21 summit in Paris, inside the conference. But, we just, again, like we made these shirts using stencils. It's just like a piece of plastic cardboard with black house paint on it. But looked, everyone's wearing the same color. Then we got, like we used the same colors in the banner. So it just tried to like build kind of a brand identity, which is one of the tools capitalism does really well. And again, this idea of, if we're trying to speak to activists, maybe everyone wearing black and spray paint font works great for everything. But if you're actually trying to reach other people, sometimes different visual vocabularies can work better or go farther. Another symbol from the COP something, I lost count, in Madrid, with these eyes. People started drawing hands on their eyes and bringing eyes to protest, kind of this idea of like, we're watching you. It was also in response to the police violence that had happened in Chile, where a lot of people lost their eyes. But this idea of, what are these repeated symbols that kind of become like an icon of your movement? Like, then, if it's an eye, then there's eyes all over the place. We're watching you. And then anyone who draws a chalk eye on the building, people know, that's about the occupation, and you guys have this fist. So that can be used as well, kind of as that symbol.
We made some red bandanas. I don't know how to say that.
Yeah.
In serigraphy machine, like we did some 400 red bandanas.
No, it's perfect. And then people can wear them. It starts a conversation. It's visible. And really everyone get the artists and like get the art students in your university involved, because they're useful here and they're not useful anywhere else. So I'm an artist, I can say that. Cool. And yeah, here was an action from Occupy London. We made this big "We Are the 99% banner, because that was kind of like, that was the story people were telling. But really push these, hand people this slogan, like ready-made, and then repeat it, branding concepts as well, but like, what is the story, like we're a generation that we will not be sacrificed, whatever, like we're not drowning, we're fighting. But like some of these slogans like really can hit home. And also I want to talk about how you can subvert symbols. Like, I'm sure universities have their own logos, even departments probably have their own logos, things like that. Here's just an example in Spain. This is like one of the traditional images of Spain. It's like a powerful bull with big balls who's like, littering the hillsides. But because this is a symbol of Spain, anything you do on that symbol is a comment about Spain. And you don't have to explain that, because everyone already understands that symbol. So often if you find a symbol that everyone already understands and then just add another layer to it, then it tells a different story. This is that same bull, but during the economic crisis, when the strong Spanish bull didn't look so strong because it had over 50% youth unemployment, and it was more of like this like wobbly little goat. And again, like, a comment about war, painting on the bull, Spain's involvement in war. And here you can even make it disappear. So think about how you can be hacking, adjusting, subvertising, redoing the existing symbols and logos, be that the sculptures in your university, their logos, the name of your university, anything like that. Here, Shell Must Fall, a campaign started in the Netherlands against Shell. Really strong branding. It's like, isn't a very big group, but they've just stolen the branding from Shell, which is strong because they paid like hundreds of millions of euros to develop it, and have been, and kind of reappropriated that. Here are some stickers that were made at the COP something in Katowice, in Poland, taking the warning logo from cigarettes. And then these people just put them up all over the cities. They put them up on advertisements. But stickers are a really nice way to get a message across, engage people in spreading the message. Not very expensive and not super criminal and like kind of hard to catch you putting it on. So maybe think about printing 500 stickers, putting them up, like warning this university like supports the fossil fuel regime, whatever, and we're just putting them up. And this idea of trying to get it visible, make yourself have like visible impact. Shell Must Fall, already talked about that. Here they are interrupting, a shareholders meeting, thinking about what meetings might be happening, like even if it's like a board meeting or something, still go in there or be outside it yelling, make it uncomfortable for them to be in there. Cool. And I wanted to show some images from the Sunrise Movement, a youth, a really well organized, at least especially in its beginning years, youth movement in the US. And the top photo here is they did an occupation of the offices of some of the government people there, the senators. But look how well composed the photo is. And it's not a chance. They drew this photo before they did it. And they had someone in the middle, and then they had the background to show there's a lot of people, but in a very kind of organized way. Look, and they've all got the same font. These are all like hand stenciled signs, but just the detail. If you paint the cardboard a color before you paint your message on it, it makes it look like you're all organized. And that's really as simple as painting lots of cardboard yellow and then giving people black paint to write their own message. And suddenly it looks like you're all organized. Yeah. Another action by Liberate Tate. I forget what this is called, but these people are inside a museum that's sponsored by oil sponsorship, getting tattoos. And the tattoos they're getting are the numbers of the parts per million of CO2 that were in the atmosphere on the year that they were born. And then this is a whole project of, I think thousands of people have gotten these tattoos by now. But maybe that's something else you want to do. Set up a free tattoo studio there, and people can get the parts per million of CO2 from the year they were born. But like, I think, or even if two people do it, that shows the level of commitment and how people take this seriously. And I think that that's part of the youth message too, is that like, we don't have a choice but to take this seriously. And it's like, yeah, this tattoo is going to last forever, but so is climate change is around the rest of my life. I'm never going to be like, shit, I wasted all that time trying to stop the collapse of the biosphere. So yeah, starting to kind of close a bit, like, as we talk about organizing, think about like the common cultural terrain. How can we be using symbols that already exist in the public consciousness and already kind of are alive in people's ideas, and they already understand them. So I don't know. I would ask, can anyone tell me what they see in those Legos? Does it mean anything?
Yeah, it's like the cartoon thing, right? Like the Simpsons.
Yeah. We got Simpsons, South Park, Asterix and Obelix, the ducks. Those are the ones I don't know. I can't see the rest because my screen is like blocking them for some reason. But you get this idea, like with a very simple visual cue, people understand what this is, in some way. And it's because we share a cultural terrain. What cultural knowledge has already permeated the collective consciousness of your culture? And how can that meaning be leveraged to provoke action? What symbols already exist around youth or already exist around adults that you can hack and redefine? And as we create these symbols, here's an image from the Gezi Park uprising in Istanbul. And on the right was CNN International, and on the left was CNN Turkey. So while there were these like massive protests sweeping the country, in Turkey, CNN Turkey decided to show a documentary about penguins. So penguins became this symbol overnight of the media's not talking about what's really going on. So this idea of this is like really artivist gold, if you can like find these simple symbols and use them and help spread them. So think, what is a symbol of the fact that your science chair is paid for by Shell or whatnot? Another idea, which may or may, like, I don't know, sometimes it's good to look like a protester, but here, these people like really look like protesters, and it's like, they don't look so friendly. Sorry, oops, I wanted to show another example of this, slides are out of order. But so think about, how do you appear to public? Like how to look sympathetic? Like maybe don't go too far and then you all look like hippies. Maybe you are, it's okay. I am too. Maybe that's not how you want to appear. Maybe you want to all dress nice. You want to wear like button-down shirts and skirts and whatever, to kind of like appear more legitimate. Here's another example of how to use wheat pastes. printing out these photos, printing out photographs of portraits of students that have been affected by climate change or just that will be. You can use that and have people write their own words on them. Printing out big portraits is a powerful way to take up space. I showed that one. Here's the other one. Don't dress like a protester. Another action by Liberate Tate. Really breaking the logic of what it looks like to be a protester. They're not wearing black and covering their face. They're wearing white. They're barefoot, showing fragility, showing vulnerability. And they eventually they were holding shells filled with oil, and they poured that onto their body, and the black dripped down onto them. And they were actually arrested for about 36 hours for that action. So here we are, speak from a place of power, do that kind of stuff, break this law. Here's some symbols. I think I'm going to stop here, but just want to end with this idea that really also think that art is an organizing tool. You don't have to wait for the occupations, but it's a great tool that someone that doesn't necessarily want to take a big role, maybe they come, if you say, hey, we're going to have an open event, we're all going to make signs and paint a big banner for the occupation, come. Maybe that's a great way to get new people involved, give people that want a small role something. It's great. You start chatting to each other. You get to know each other better. And it's a great way to get people more involved as they go with the occupation and even ahead of it. So think of art as an organizing tool. And I'm going to stop there. But yeah, as I mentioned, a lot of these resources are written up on the Artivist Network website. So I'll put it in the chat, artivistnetwork.org/resources. You can find, download a bunch of this stuff, download the climate impacts wheat paste murals. And actually, I'm just going to share my screen again quickly to show this website. Here's, we've got the climate memorial recipe book. Those are the wheat paste. How to do a guerrilla projection. I don't know if you have a projector. How to make climate impacts wheat paste murals. How to organize an art space. If you're going to have like one of these events where you invite people to come and paint stuff, or at your event, have an art space. Here's a ton of climate justice stencils. Like really, they've got like a whole vocabulary of stencils. And then a few other kind of artivism toolkits and inspiration ideas that can be used, as well as a bunch more talks, kind of like this one. But yeah, I think I'll leave it there. I think we'll leave it there, and maybe I'll stop the recording and we can take any questions if there are. But thank you everyone for listening and watching, and good luck.